I'm David Bresch. I'm a professor for weather and climate risks at the ETH Zürich, and jointly with the Swiss Meteorological Office, MeteoSwiss. I work in climate adaptation. I mainly look at the impacts of climate change on socioeconomic systems. I have a background in physics. I spent 16 years in the industry, and I'm back since about 8 years in academia. My work is very much engaging with stakeholders to figure what really matters and how we can improve their situation, how we can appraise adaptation options, not least those rooted in using ecosystem-based adaptation. And my work is very much underpinned with a software platform I'm going to talk about in a second. In the following short talk, I'd like to spend a couple minutes on case studies worldwide with highlighting the role of ecosystem-based adaptation and also refer to the option of risk transfer to deal with climate change impacts. Climate change affects all kinds of systems worldwide, and therefore I've been quite engaged since many years in the economics of climate adaptation. What does that mean? It means we have a craving for economic development, not always just blunt growth, to be honest, but you have the challenge to adapt to a changing environment due to climate change, and there we need climate resilient development. This does not come automatically, so we basically provided and started to develop a unique framework to identify cost-effective climate adaptation measures. It does take into account the asset base, but that can also be people and communities, the hazards, integrates that and provides our decision makers with a risk map, the damages, but it doesn't stop at the problem statement, say, of the situation. It does also provide them with an indication of what kind of ecosystem-based adaptation options, infrastructure measures, community-based adaptation options, and what possibly risk transfer could do in order to better manage climate-related risks and therefore strengthen societal resilience. The ultimate goal is to unlock climate finance by bringing all that information into the development of climate adaptation strategies, and last but not least, to help the funding case going forward. You see on the right a bit of a reference to a kind of a guidebook for practitioners, how to apply that methodology, and I'm going to highlight a few cases where we've done so in the recent past. We looked in all kinds of situations, be it hazards, different economic sectors, and different risk cultures, and like to spend a few minutes on cases in Bangladesh, US Gulf Coast, the Caribbean, and Mali. In all these cases, we found the following situation. Risk today is already there. Development puts more people and assets at risk, and climate change aggravates the situation. That's the sobering position we are in, and will be even more so going forward. But then there is the good news, and that's the green arrow. There is climate adaptation, risk reduction through cost-effective management options, such as ecosystem-based or technological green and gray solutions, also behavioral measures you might take, warning systems, for example. But there is residual risk where avoidance or reduction only is possible at excessively high cost, and that's the place where insurance is an option. If you look one specific place, the Mopti district in Mali, where we looked into the risk to agricultural production, it's a bit around that story. So risk today is not negligible. Development does add some, and climate change adds even more to the lack or loss of agricultural yield in the region. But it's an interesting case because in theory, a lot could be cost-effectively reduced. That's the green arrow. And it's basically making sure agriculture is fit for purpose and adjusted to the local situation. Not to say more, because I'd like to stay brief, but this is a kind of an environment which can tolerate quite some stress from natural variability. But you know, the sobering political reality in that region makes it hard to farm that way. Not to say more, to move on to the next example, which basically we briefly look at the city of Barijal in Bangladesh and flood risk, the risk to people. Risk today is non-negligible either in this place. Development puts further people at risk. That's the annual average flood victims due to weather today. It's built on a model which models thousands of flood events hitting people, and the text shows here only the average for illustration purposes. Also here the good news, things can be done to improve the situation. What's behind that in a snapshot is this probabilistic model you have on the right, the map of Barisal, the city center. And if you apply that model, you see it's not the people in city center which are most affected relative to their economic terms. It's the conurbations, the environment around the city where a lot of informal settlements are placed. And the simulated impact on people therefore informs us where people are most at risk relative to their capabilities. And one way they could improve the situation by thinking about bringing back flood resilient crops. You have here a spatially explicit map of what level of damage to their yield could be avoided by planting more flood resilient crops. So up to 40% of the loss could be reduced by moving to such a type of cropping. Just another illustration how that methodology allows you to highlight even spatially explicit what a particular adaptation could bring. But the study looked in much more. I just produce a highlight here. Please have a look at the link. What's behind that, and that's why I take for illustration, is really that detailed loss model where you have the hazard component, so the specific evolution of a particular single event like a tropical cyclone hitting assets, and then you see it on the center right side, the simulated impact of that asset, of that hazard on a specific set of assets. What you can now do is you can, in light blue, change the development scenario. I've seen that before in the two examples. You can change the climate forcing of the system, but last but not least, and that's why it's in green, you can also think about resilience measured adaptation options, and the model allows you to appraise their efficiency by saying, what if things would be in better shape? What if we would do this? Could that not make a difference? It often makes a difference. And we can then look at the effectiveness, the benefit cost ratio of these things. Now, the model is not run with a single event. This is a small snapshot. It's run globally, not only for the past as shown here, but also for the future using synthetic storms. So it's quite a comprehensive engine to simulate the present and the future climate and the extremes within these developments. If you apply that to Barbados, you get the picture, similar picture as before. Risk today, that's now the risk to the total economy in the region, is again substantial. Development is the key driver of risk, and climate change, depending on how it plays out, is aggravating again the situation. Again here, there is a green arrow on it, means there are risk reduction measures to basically for the life-saving side of things also in that region. And there is remaining risk, and for that one, risk transfer is an option. And as you probably know, Barbados is part of the CARICOM. So there's the Caribbean Cat Risk Insurance Facility, short in CRIF, and that helps these countries deal with these kind of risks, and we're going to show that in a second. So in essence, you get the risk analysis as shown, but what you can now do, you can produce a so-called adaptation cost curve and say, what's the avoided damage for particular type of measures? I just put them as blocks in here, and you can look at the benefit cost ratio of all these particular measures. You can do that either for small and moderate climate change, and you see that $1 spent brings about $3 in risk reduction of a particular measure. I don't go into details here, but there's a reason why some are in dark green. So observe those. Now, even on the moderate climate change, these measures still work. They, in fact, are become a little bit more effective because there's more risks that can be absorbed. When you look at what's behind the dark green, it's ecosystem-based adaptation options, and they can avert a substantial amount of damage over time. So the horizontal axis shows us it's up to about 300 million of US dollars of damage up to at the time of the study from 2010 to 2030, about 300 million of US dollars that can be averted just by implementing ecosystem-based adaptation. And that all comes at lower an investment than the damage that these things avert. We put that into a web-based platform. You're happy to browse together with the Nature Conservancy and other partners, to basically look at coastal resilience, not only in Barbados, but also at the whole US Gulf Coast. And just one short snapshot, it's again, you see it on the left, this type of waterfall curve, which shows you risk today, growth, and climate change contributing to it. Then you see all kind of adaptation measures, wetland restoration, oyster reef restoration, beach nourishment you can do in order to better manage the situation. And most times, ecosystem-based adaptation is very powerful and brings a very high risk reduction at quite low cost. You can play with that tool, that's why I provide the link, but it does not do all of it. And that's why for the US Gulf Coast, as shown before, I can also show you the effect of insurance. A similar picture again, and that's the risk now to the economy, more precisely, mainly the energy system as part of the whole economy. And you see there, this picture, risk today is the biggest chunk, economic development increases risk, climate change aggravates it, and quite some of that can again be adapted to through mainly ecosystem-based measures, so coastal protection as shown before, but there is also a piece which is harder to manage, and that's shown on this second last slide. It's, say, look at the 1 in 100-year damage, which for that region, the whole area, can be up to 200 billion. That's a bit bigger even than we had it during Katrina. Now, the cost-efficient adaptation brings it down by 70 billion, and then there is some tolerance and budget capabilities of the whole region. It's an affluent place of the planet, but there is a gap. And the gap can either be covered by risk transfer in orange, and that can absorb 100% of that risk at relatively low cost annually, or you could try to fill the gap by further non-cost efficient measures, and that's much more expensive than the insurance options. So the insurance option basically means you build a collective along the whole coast, and all people pay into that scheme, and in dire times, the scheme helps to cover all these risks. And with that, I'm at the end of my speech to really thank all the partners listed, because it's not a work of a single research group, it's work of which happens in EU projects, in collaborations. Over time, also, some of those I started when I was still at Swiss Re. So it's also a public-private partnership in furthering the economics of adaptation, understanding the role of ecosystems as one and often a quite cost-effective adaptation option. With that, I'd like to thank you for your attention.